In the video Someone Should versus Let Me, I discussed the collectivist versus individualist worldviews. I mentioned some of this as well in the video Cities of Sadness, but if given the choice of where to live, where do you think a collectivist versus an individualist would go? What kind of society or area would they prefer? So, who do you think would prefer to be in a densely populated metropolitan area or a remote, sparse countryside? It has been of interest to me to see which kind of people are drawn to certain kind of areas by their personalities or values, or if they shape the areas to fit them. It's likely going to be a combination of both factors. You choose a place with certain locations, but after you move there, you live in it for a while and give it that lived in feel as it becomes more of your home. But the general collectivist versus individualist mentality is something that I've noticed that was further affirmed during the 2016 presidential election. There's something I noticed about some Americans, but especially people from outside of America looking in. When they picture the United States of America, they tend to think of the culture, opinions, and demographics that are present in only a handful of the major cities. These cities are in actuality, both in area and population, a minority of the country and tend to be the least indicative of what it would be like to actually live in that country, let alone identify with its culture. This is not limited to the United States of America, but applies to many other countries as well. So why does this persist, this misconception of, or misunderstanding of what the nature of a country is, what the character of a country is? I'll give some thoughts on that. Despite what some of us may think, we still put a lot of importance in actual experiences. So I think the tourism industry plays a big part in some of these misconceptions. When a tourist visits a place, they may think they have experienced the people and contemporary culture, but I think that would be a wrong assumption. As one would expect from any well-run service sector, the people those tourists met were going out of their way to please a potentially well-paying client. Potentially well-paying is a very key thing here. You'll see this in places like Nairobi, which is in Kenya, which has a lot of tourism. You go to these tourist spots, and there's a generally understood trope that, or it's a generally understood complaint that the Kenyans themselves are not treated as well as the Wazungus, the white people, the tourists, because the people serving them understand, or they have this thought that, oh, we're not going to actually get tipped as much. Another thing about these areas is the people that you meet in these places. Locals don't often visit touristy areas. They'll actually go out of their way to avoid those areas in some cases. And in other cases, you'll just live there and think, okay, I'll go there next weekend, I'll go there the week after, and find yourself actually attending these tourist places or visiting them only when you have people from out of town visiting you. So the people these tourists meet are often going to pains to smile because it pays. So now when you think of a well-run service sector, the people are trained, they're taught to make the tourists not notice the effort. It's supposed to seem effortless. Now add to that the vacation mindset that most people go into. People don't often go on vacation and maintain the mindset they have when they're back home working. Sometimes the very point of the trip is to not think about how it pays to smile, but instead just experience genuine smiles. Now you don't have to travel across countries or oceans to notice this effect. It can happen even within a city. Depending on your location in the city, you can get a whole different feel. So, take Rome for example. If you spend a night in the historical center of Rome, Italy, where you might meet 20 people from 10 different countries and not hear Italian spoken even once, even the employees, salespeople, and other vendors you interact with may not be Italians. I actually have experience with this, having gone to school there for a while and having some of my friends have worked at the bars and restaurants in these areas. So significant parts of the city are ran like open-air museums and targeted to the tourists who have very fleeting interest with much of the goings-on of how the city runs and exists. So if you know someone that's been to Rome, or if you just look up the pictures of Rome, what do you see? The historical center, even though most of the city is comprised of residential neighborhoods. But most foreigners have little reason to know these as more as possibly a somewhat attractive backdrop during a commute. The life of Romans is not the Rome that most people speak of when they fondly recall their time there. Essentially, what I'm saying is that when in Rome, most people did not do as the Romans do. So, just as one neighborhood may not represent the entire city, a city may not represent the region, let alone the country. So, collectivists are drawn to collectives, collective resources, services, movements, etc. And as such, you will find many of these type of people in cities. It is a habitat conducive to their worldview. Individualists can succeed as individuals, resourceful, self-sufficient, personally driven. These are traits that can not only flourish in remote areas, but they may even create a certain wariness for groups or being around groups where they may be subject to consequences of failures that accrue or result from things that are outside of their personal influence. So, with that in mind, what areas or living conditions or people would want more government control? What are governments? Are they not structures of centralized decision making for large groups of people? Cities likely began similar to how rural areas are today, with rugged individualists making the most out of the resources present in certain locations. So, for example, there's a coal mine or there's a river. Rivers are key because a lot of major cities still have rivers running through them. So, there's fishing, there's commerce, there's shipping, and all these things. Somebody goes there, takes advantage of that, gains some wealth, attracts more people who see the opportunity, more people start getting to that one location, and what's the most valuable resource in the world is humans. So more humans are there, more people there come to take advantage of each other's shared resources, and you eventually get a situation where a collective forms and collectivists start coming to live in that area. Speaking of how valuable human resources are, there's this guy Jordan I met. I mentioned him in the Cities of Sadness video. I've just been spending time getting out in the city and actually talking to people and getting to know new people, and a lot of good things have come. So we were discussing this topic of cities and collectivism and individualism in rural areas, and he was telling me how he proposed that maybe people in cities may be open to taxation since they see so many in need but do not feel like they can or want to directly help that many people. Yet in rural areas, they don't engender that same level of guilt since there's just not that many people. So, regardless, it is also lost on many that taxation is theft and outsourcing to the government often exacerbates the problem. I would liken this behavior, this communal behavior, to taking something to numb the pain. You know, having a painkiller after you break a bone so you can keep walking, instead of taking your time to take a break, sit down, set the bone, and let it heal. So, Jordan saw it as a case of the environment creating the people, and said that I was more on this end of thinking that it was the people that created the environment. We both agreed that there's a little of both there, but I likened it to the chicken and the egg analogy of which one first came, the chicken or the egg. Although an egg is just an egg, but unless it's a chicken that laid the egg, it isn't a chicken egg. But that's that's just something I have to say on that chicken before egg thing. But in this sense, a chicken lays an egg, and then once the egg is created, the chicken values that egg enough that it will change the chicken's behavior. So there's kind of a tandem that it works in there, parent and child to each other in different ways. So I think the same things that make it an unnatural environment or a new environment, because I think it's all part of nature. It's what natural beings as humans created. We just haven't adjusted to it yet. But take the internet, for example. If you go on a popular website, you're just one person among millions of people. But think of the anonymity that the internet can afford you, that a lot of people consider to be very positive. That effect can also be felt in large megacities. A difference being with your city and being online is you're always in the city, yet you choose to be online. So, with that, someone can say something rather gruesome but honest, and they don't have to attach their face to it. They don't have to own it in the same sense that you would in person. So, in the inverse, you can also read one statement that is then amplified and repeated to a level where you think it is shared by most people in a given group. So, this has nothing whatsoever to do with whether that statement is true or not, let alone how many other people hold it. The misconceptions people have about cities apply to a larger number of people than they would in smaller towns. So there's a common trope about people in the countryside being a lot more friendly than in the city, that you can just walk next to somebody, meet in a random place in some small store in the corner in the country, and have a 15-minute conversation, which I've mentioned before has happened to me. And you think that, okay, in cities this doesn't happen, people are a lot more cold and detached when in public. So the general thought is, yeah, this may come from people seeing you as an interesting individual in the countryside, but in the city you just were dismissed as one of the multitude of people. Or it could also be, hey, this is a new person, this is an area that I know, I kind of need to secure this area, let me find out who this person is. Whereas in the city, it's just like, yeah, you're just another person. We have limited time. It makes sense that we would not invest too much time into people that we might never see again. You see a new person in a town, and that might be the new resident out of the 5,000 people. And I think that's what I'm talking about with the unnatural or new environment. If you think of the scale here, now out in public, if you're just in some store, that's you considered part of maybe hundreds of thousands of people who may be walking about that time. But these random conversations do occur in cities. And I think they occur more within urban shared communal areas, like an apartment complex, for example. So, in this sense, they kind of view you as a member of maybe this apartment of, let's say it's an apartment of 40 units. Now, that's a smaller group. So, in that situation, I think there's more of a chance of you striking up these random conversations. And that's because they're picturing you in the same small, limited group of people that mirrors the mental image of the group of people that you're in of a rural community. So I still identify as an individualist and prefer people that do the same. And I personally think that's the only way you can really be somebody is to value your individual self and other people's individuality. In this video, I was discussing the mindsets. I wasn't setting any value on whether collectivism or individualism is better, although it definitely is individualism. But with the different mindsets that you find in these places, the different people that you meet, now, when you think of the term "there's strength in numbers," where are the numbers? Is it that the city has a lot more people, so it's a stronger environment to live in? Or the fact that there's more rural towns, individual rural towns put together in aggregate than there are individual cities put together? Which one is the strength? But when it comes down to just the people, the amount of people, if you're in a city, for example, New York, if you walk out to New York, you go to Times Square, you could possibly see at least 5,000 people in an hour. Now, being in Times Square, 5,000 people, you might see them, but you might not actually talk to anyone. No one may care to stop and say hello. Isn't it, could it be a preferential situation to be in a small town of maybe 100 people where you just walk out and you'll see five people? Maybe five people will stop and say hi and ask what's going on in your life. Which is a stronger situation in that case? There's the potentiality versus the actuality of the situation. And you see this a lot in relationships, making friendships that you build into relationships. You go out, you meet somebody, and you think, oh, this person is pretty cool. But then that person, or you're thinking, oh, they might be 20 other people that are walking past this restaurant that are cooler than this person that I could meet. So you don't take the time to invest in actually getting to know that person. Or somebody might have a really interesting thing, suggest, hey, come to this really cool thing, but you're thinking, no, I have to leave this time open in case something better comes up, something more interesting comes up. Now, with the strength in numbers thing, if you look at a snowflake, the individual snowflake, if you look at it close enough, it's rather cool looking, beautiful, has its own qualities, but it's not necessarily something you'd consider to be strong. When you think of strong, you don't think snowflake. So although a collection of these snowflakes could create a very strong thing like an avalanche, it can also end up burying you and hampering you from doing other things. I'm going to link to a blog post including its article about a church being sued for letting homeless people sleep on its property. So to me, this is an example of some collective laws and limitations and regulations that end up preventing people from helping others. But things are changing, using these multi-use things. I've always thought of a place like New York again, how it's somewhat of a waste that all the office space stays empty at night. There's a lot that can be done with this. Advancements in technology will continue to provide solutions for a lot of the problems that we face today. It will help us adjust to this new time, and I think, as I said, we're behind the curve on this. But the app I was talking about, or the app I'm talking about here, is an app that makes use of the restaurants as office space during their off hours. So, for example, if a restaurant opens from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., so even though the people who are working in the restaurant will come in before 5 p.m., they're normally in the back in the kitchen kind of setting up the food, and they're not necessarily in the front. So have the chairs and the tables in that space being used as an office from, let's say, 8 a.m. until 1 p.m. or 3 p.m. or whatever. So this is a good thing. It's a promising thing to see things like this. So that's it for this post. Thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. Till next time, bye.